Good afternoon and welcome to Building Back Better, Radical Reimagining of Future Policy, presented by Nathan Ashely, Senior Public Policy Officer at Voy Technology, and Jermain Jackman, singer, activist, and author. Jermain, the floor is yours.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're joining us in the world, taking part and listening in to this most amazing conference. I want to start by saying thanks to the hardworking team at BYP for pulling together such an amazing conference during this month, or the last 2 days, and being able to host such a great panel of discussions, amazing panelists, and topics that we really care about. My name is Jermain Jackman. As Jordan just said, I'm a singer, activist, author, and what couldn't fit there at the bottom of that is full-time troublemaker. And I'm going to tell you a bit more why they call me a full-time troublemaker. And I'm joined by my good friend. I'll let him introduce himself, actually.
Cheers, Jermain. And yes, I can attest, you are sometimes a troublemaker. So yeah, hi everyone. And again, thank you to BYP for putting on a fantastic conference. And obviously we're wrapping up today. I wish it could go on longer. But my name's Nathan Ashely. I'm the Senior Public Policy Manager at Voy Technology. For those of you who don't know Voy, we are an e-scooter micromobility company, which was founded in 2018. So if you live in Bristol, Liverpool, or any of those cities, you'll see a Coral e-scooter about the city. So do make sure you get on one of those, ditch the car and get on a Voy.
We're trying to find out that discount code though, Nathan. Like, where's the discount codes at? You want to hook us up? Because there's some brothers and sisters and some of our siblings in the chat, and they're just saying, look, we want some discounts.
Nate 2021, there you go.
Wonderful. But I just want to give you guys a bit of a background to this discussion and why we're actually here. So the topic is radical reimagining of future policy, building back better. Building back better is a term that has now been used widely amongst governments, prime ministers, presidents, and leaders of countries from around the world. If we cast our minds back to the last 21 months when the pandemic actually started, we saw the disproportionate impacts it had on Black and other global majority communities here in this country, in the UK. We saw how Black-led organizations were hit the hardest. We saw domestic violence shoot through the roof. And I was speaking to a Black domestic violence organization called Sister Space, based here in East London. And they were talking about how their services, people accessing their services, has risen for over 300%. We saw during that time the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. And we saw companies and corporations around the world suddenly wake up to, oh my goodness, racism actually exists. Racism, we didn't know Black people were going through these trials and tribulations and systemic oppression. And then we saw them start to make declarations of anti-racist statements, committing to millions and millions of pounds to Black and brown-led organizations. And over a year on, what did we see? 50% of that never actually happened. And the other 50% of it were short-term funding for organizations, but also from funds from organizations who were exploiting other people of color around the world for palm oil. It didn't make sense. You can't call yourself an anti-racist but exploiting our brothers and sisters in other parts of the world. It doesn't make sense. So we saw economies destroyed. We saw livelihoods gone. We saw people unable to access certain services like before. And it really leveled. We talk about how, governments were talking about how the virus does not discriminate. But we saw the disproportionality. And we know society does discriminate. And the way the virus maneuvered and worked was along the lines of race. It reflected the same systems and structures and organizations and institutions that we have here in this country that discriminate and creates inequality. So now we have the background of what we can actually call a perfect storm. You had, sorry to use the terminology, but you had the murder of George Floyd. You had the disproportionate deaths of COVID. You had Black-led organizations hit the hardest. You had young people unable to access certain services, unable to leave their homes due to overcrowded homes. Us as Black people, we're looking left, right, center. We were being attacked from all over the place. So when governments and prime ministers talk about building back better, well, better for who? Because better never worked for us. I mean, when they say the new normal, the old normal never worked for us. When they talk about building back better, what does that actually mean? Because so far we're seeing parents really struggle to even think about how they're going to put food on the table for Christmas while billions of pounds are given away in COVID contracts. So we need to ask ourselves, what does building back better actually mean for Black people? And I want to ask you that question, Nathan. What does building back better actually mean for you?
Yeah, no, you're right. It is a really good question. And I suppose, like you said, the inequalities in which COVID brought out has come to light for many people across the globe. But it's also an opportunity. If we think about organizations can potentially use this to reimagine and put into action. I think that's the key word, putting what we imagine into action and trying to create places for people and putting in frameworks that will lead to a long-term future for everyone, especially those marginalized in society. But for me, that might sound great, a utopia even, but realistically, how are we going to get there? There's been a lot of rhetoric, and it feels like we've been here before. So if people would go cast their minds back to 2007 with the credit crunch, that had a global impact across many economies, but yet we are back where we are again, and we're having the same conversation again. So I think one of the key things with building back better, and I suppose in my job and many of the policy areas which I've worked on, I would like to see building back better in regards to the environment. So last year, the inquest into the death of Ella Adu-Kisi Deborah found unlawful air pollution a factor in Ella's death. In the UK, asthma is number one for childhood illnesses. And currently in the UK, 3 people die from asthma every day, and at least 2 of those deaths are avoidable. And the reason why I mention asthma, having asthma myself and having grown up in Haringey, going to a primary school in Bounds Green, which was actually on the main road, and breathing in toxic air every single day, we know that air pollution impacts communities which tend to be from poorer backgrounds. They tend to live on busier streets. And Ella's death and the unlawful air pollution in which she died in the inquest showed that was a key thing in her death, is that when it comes to the environment and building back better, we need to ensure that it's going to be cleaner, greener city for everyone. So things such as the ultra low emission zone, which has just come into place in London, which I worked on a long time ago, being at Transport for London, that resonates with me. And I think that's the key part of a lot of the things which I would like to see moving forwards, making sure that people aren't breathing in toxic air, making sure that the water they drink is clean, making sure that the basics in every city across the world is at a level where everyone could be living a clean and healthy life. So I think building back better means building back a better, greener, cleaner environment. I think the other one is around addressing long-standing barriers. So I think one of the key things which I noticed in lockdown last year is, of course, a lot of us weren't able to get about. And as a result, one of the things which many of us had to do was walk and not go too far, or maybe even cycle. So what we've seen, particularly in London, is that the barriers to cycling, because there are fewer cars on the road, people felt more confident to go out and cycle. And what we've seen is that numbers, TfL have just reported this, that the numbers, particularly for Black, Asian, minority ethnic groups around cycling has increased. Now, building back better is also making sure that those long-standing barriers are removed and people from those communities are able to access services and do things which they probably felt like they couldn't do before. So I think building back better means addressing those long-standing barriers and ensuring that people, no matter if they have a disability, too young or too old, are able to do the things which everyone else has the privilege in doing in society. And I think the last one for me in terms of building back better is around social entrepreneurship and technology. Now, the UK is obviously grappling with a lack of representation at leadership level across all sectors. If the voice of communities aren't heard at the tables of power, its interests aren't represented. And my career and everything I've done around policy is making sure that there are people in the room which can actually have these conversations and steer policy in the right direction, which can impact many people from many communities which aren't always represented. So more diverse leadership, we all know, creates a more equitable society. And by supporting social entrepreneurs, we accelerate this shift. Now, this is a bit of a plug for Quanda, and the founder, Jermain Craig, is the founder of Quanda, and they're basically a modern collection pot for the Black community. And the reason why I mention them is, this is the combination of technology and being able to reach out to many different people and come up with new ideas to try and drive social change. If anyone hasn't sort of been on their site, do check it out. It's Quanda, spelled Kwanda. And you essentially can become a villager and contribute to other communities in different parts of the world, particularly Black communities. So I think social entrepreneurship is key, trying to create young people from diverse backgrounds, getting them to the point where they can be the Mark Zuckerbergs of the future and can actually invest that money back into their communities will be a key part of trying to build back better, quicker. So I think environment, addressing long-standing barriers, and social entrepreneurship via technology will be some of the 3 key areas which I like to see develop, and hopefully could be the key to unlocking and building back better.
Love that. And it breaks my heart that we had a young Black girl in London die from the toxic air. Yet another statistic to how Black communities, Black and brown communities here in this capital, in this country, are disproportionately hit by some of the changing environments. I want to talk briefly about how we can build back better. How can the Black community build back better? Because I think, and please write in the comments if I'm wrong. And I also want you to contribute to this conversation. What does building back better mean for you too? So please write that in the conversation. What does building back better mean for you? And we're able to read it out and use that as prompts for our conversation too. But building back better also means that we need to be aware of the emerging industries. They say that half of all the jobs that are going to be there in the next 10 years currently don't exist. So how do we stay ahead of the curve and ensure that we're awake to the emerging industries? From the conversations that I have had in the recent time, it looks like there's going to be the legalization of cannabis in the next 5 to 10 years in this country. And what I don't want to see is white middle-class men opening up coffee shops up and down the road when Black men have been hit by the legal system, and men of color too, for carrying small ounces of cannabis, where we have brothers in prison for having for drug offenses, but now it's legalized, and we're seeing everyone else benefit from that, apart from those who are still in prison for those offenses. How do we ensure that they too can clear their record, clear their name, and benefit from an emerging industry? How can we ensure that they have the skills to open up their own shops, set up their own cannabis brands? How do we ensure that there's a process of decriminalization first before we legalize, to ensure that we don't have the environment where white middle-class men just end up setting up those coffee shops everywhere and we're having to buy it from them? How do we get a piece of that pie? And that's something that we need to think about, those emerging industries. Again, with the green industrial revolution, I often say there's not enough Black and green. From the movements that we're seeing on up and down Whitehall, the protests, I'm not seeing any Black or brown speakers or activists. They are there. They're not giving the platform. But also when we think about green jobs, are we encouraging our young to speak up and speak out? Are we encouraging our young to set up e-scooter repair shops or air conditioning units? For those who are from parts of Africa and the Caribbean and warm parts in the world would know that they have an air conditioning infrastructure in those countries.
And Jermain, I was just going to say, because you are talking about building back better, and particularly with stuff around the environment. And if anyone does, thinks about this with any ounce of common sense, if you're going to if we're going to tackle the climate change issues happening in the world today, it starts with making sure that, Africa as a continent doesn't fail, because, disproportionately moving, buying lots of, it'd be Apple products or whatever it might be, the mines, the places in which those places need to be dug up to get those minerals, those places are being dug up, tends to be Africa, tends to be third world countries. And yet the world in which we live in today, those would be the places, the Western world, which would be benefiting from those technologies, but equally at the same time displacing and creating more issues in a place like Africa. So if Africa and other continents aren't able to tackle climate change, flooding things, then, it's not, this is a global issue, and Black people do need to be around the table. So it'll be very interesting when COP26 happens.
100%. Like, even when we're talking about COP, I still ain't seen a black face yet. We're talking about COP26. Climate justice is about racial justice. The countries that are hit the most about climate change, my parents are from Guyana in South America. Guyana is below sea level to begin with. And with the rising sea levels, our village is flooding every single year without fail, with the water coming higher and higher and higher. Other Caribbean islands are facing the same thing with the hurricanes. Hurricanes are getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And we don't have, those Caribbean countries don't have the economy, don't have the money, and they definitely don't have the materials for strong built houses for strong winds. And what annoys me about all of this is that the people who are hit the hardest are not the people who are causing the O2 emissions, are not the highest polluters in this world. That's what's frustrating me. That's what's frustrating me, because we need to center their voices if we want to build back better. We've seen the vaccine rollout. The UK, Boris Johnson, jab, jab, jab. Great, wonderful. But there's no point in you jabbing every single British person if our brothers and sisters across the continent of Africa, across the Caribbean, South America, across the global South aren't able to get jabs either. We can't be hoarding all the jabs, all the vaccines. They depend on those vaccines too. That's what building back better is. We saw during the pandemic how every nation on this planet started to look inwards rather than a global strategy to curb this virus, a global strategy to curb this virus. We didn't see that. And it made me wonder what needs to happen for the world to come together. Do we need aliens to invade the planet for us to come together? Do we need an apocalypse to be knocking on our doorstep for us to come together? What needs to happen? So the emerging industries, the green industrial revolution, we would love to see black people a part of that. We'd love to see black jobs created out of that. They say green jobs, and I say there's not enough black and green. We want to see those green jobs provided to black communities, and we would love to see, because black people, we have the innovation, we have the ideas. Let's just inspire our young people, and that's what I'm here for. I'm inspiring them day to day. But let's also, on this last point, but let's also, we can't forget that we're having another industrial revolution, the green industrial revolution, in an unequal world, in a world that is disadvantaged. Well, black people are disadvantaged. So there's no point of us building back better if we're not prepared to better the system that has us oppressed. We talk about the knee on the neck. I haven't seen the image or the video of George Floyd. I'm tired of seeing black trauma. But the knee on the neck is so symbolic of oppression. When we see the high rates of the maternal deaths of black women in hospitals, that's the knee on the neck. When we're seeing young black men stopped and searched on the streets, that's the knee on the neck. What we want to see is the knee off of our necks. We want to see a fairer system where every single young person, every single community, the most marginalized of communities, are able to participate, are able to reach their full potential as well. Go ahead, Nathan. I'm seeing the chat below up, and I'm reading it, and I'm incorporating what you're saying. Go ahead.
No, I was going to just talk about green jobs, actually. We're thinking about what the future looks like. If we jump forward to, if we go back a bit, I remember dial-up broadband, and we moved past that quite quickly. Then you start to move into the way in which Instagram, Twitter, and a number of these platforms have grown to such a degree. Certain jobs which didn't even exist in the past, like social media jobs, now exist, and also jobs are being automated as well. So thinking about young black men and women growing up and thinking about what jobs they want to do, green jobs will potentially be the ones which will make them resilient to unemployment. Green jobs might be the thing which helps them support and rebuild their community. And I think defining what green jobs mean, helping inform local communities as to what that actually looks like, and then also giving parents the confidence that actually their children going into jobs like that will have a future. Because the reality is some of the jobs which kids have been encouraged in schools where maybe some teachers feel like they're a problem child, the reality is they will be unemployed if they're being pushed down the wrong path. And there's a number of jobs which will be out there, all created in the future. And without, sharing that knowledge amongst those communities, unfortunately, it will continue to lead to unemployment. And those people won't ever be able to get out of the build from their local for their community and themselves.
100%. And we're seeing that young black boys are excluded from school from the get-go. Young black girls are excluded because their hair is unprofessional. They're put into pupil referral units where they can't access the fullness of education. They can't. Some schools, I remember I had a head of year who couldn't comprehend a confident young black man and thought I was arrogant. So we need to be able to build back better in our schools, to provide a great learning environment and an inspirational space for our young people. We know that teachers are overworked and underpaid, so that means building back better too. When we think about college and supporting young people in whatever career paths that they want to go down, when I tell you the innovation amongst our young people is immense. So how do we actually build back better? I'm mindful of time and we don't have a lot of it, but how do we actually build back better? I saw one of the questions earlier, and I think it was from Jane, saying, well, how do I get involved in creating policies? Nathan, just shed some light on how people can actually get involved. Do they have to apply to be a civil servant or work part of a local authority to be able to shape policy?
Well, I think everyone, no matter what job you're in, you probably will be able to affect policy. So you can either affect the policy of your company. Some companies are better than others at engaging with their employees. So that as a starting point, it might be where you work. Then there's, I suppose, the community spaces in which wherever you might live. So that could be becoming politically active. Jermain, that is definitely something which you've been doing in your community, for example. Or it could be, campaigning, because I think finding an interest area of which you believe in, and then educating yourself about that interest area and trying to drive the change in that particular area is one way in which you can get involved in policy. Actually, even removing the word policy is really about politics. And if we believe that everything really is politics, no matter what you do or say, you're always going to be involved in policy, even if you're talking to someone and influencing them or changing their minds. That, in essence, will lead to hopefully proactive and positive policy change. But I think the main thing, outside of people which do it as their job, such as myself, I think it's when consultations take place, do respond to those. People like myself do read them, and no matter what it is, I think engaging with areas which you find of interest is a good starting point and a good entry into policy making.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that insight. Another question from Manny. Do we know of any organizations and charities that support young black youth? There are hundreds. I can't even list them off right now, but there are hundreds in Hackney, there are hundreds in Lambeth, hundreds in Brent and Barnet, hundreds in Stratford and Newham. Please go onto your local websites, do some searching around, and you will find these organizations who support young people. These are the same organizations who were told you can get X amount of money because the death of George Floyd. They didn't get a penny. They didn't get a penny, and they're having to work overtime. Sometimes they're having to do voluntary work just to ensure our young people can achieve and reach their full potential. So, how do we shape policy? And we only got 5 minutes left, so I'm going to be really quick. They call me a troublemaker for a reason, because I'm always causing trouble on a local grassroots level. If we're talking about changing the status quo, changing the establishment, you're going to have to cause some trouble. You're going to have to shake some tables. Hell, break some tables, because we're trying to break the system. The same system that has its knee on all of our necks, on women, on our LGBT brothers and sisters and siblings, on Black people, on disabled people. We're having to break the system. So we are all troublemakers, and I hope you can all leave this conversation and call yourself a troublemaker. I want to see some more campaigns. I want to see some more activists. I want to see some more people attending their local authority meetings to speak on certain things that are being voted through. If we've got any listeners from Hackney, East London, or in Peckham or Brixton, or parts of Manchester and Leeds and Birmingham, you guys will know the effects of gentrification. Even not in the UK, I go to Brooklyn quite often. I'm seeing gentrification in the Bronx in America. What we want to see is not gentrification, but regeneration. We want you to uplift the community. We want you to invest in the community. We want you to raise the community up with these new apartments that you're building. Make them affordable too, and truly, genuinely affordable. Not affordable if you're earning 90K a year. We know what affordability actually means. So in the last couple of minutes, I guess my message to everybody here is I want to see you all being active in spaces. I want to see you all shaping policy in that way. Speaking to your local MP, speaking to your mayor and your political representatives, setting up organizations. If you feel like there is a gap, firstly, research to make sure you're not reinventing the wheel, and then set up that organization, set up that campaign to change that policy that you're so passionate about. One of the things that I'm doing in Hackney is the Reclamation Movement, which is about reclaiming the vacant spaces created by the pandemic and giving it back to the community. We're already doing that with recording studios and open spaces. We're making a new African Empowerment Center in Hackney, which is really exciting. Those are some of the innovative ways that we can reclaim certain spaces, but also tackle some of the policies that the council won't do. Let's stop waiting for the government. Let's stop waiting for our MPs. Let's stop waiting for the political institution to care about us, because they don't. Let's stop waiting for them to change the system because it's working for them. It doesn't work for us, and it's working perfectly fine for them. So they won't change it. If we want to see change, let's lead the change that we want to see. So what are my calls to action? Be outspoken. Speak up and speak out. Be ahead of the curve. Think about what are those emerging industries that are coming up, and how can we ensure that our next generation are ahead of the curve in their thinking, being innovative and imaginative. And we encourage that imagination, by the way, and that creativity, because sometimes we like to stunt it. Let's encourage that imagination. Let's encourage the innovation amongst our young people and let them create the new industries and the new jobs for them. Let's shape and challenge the thinking of some of these companies and colleagues in our workplace. We got colleagues coming up to us talking about, oh, well, what book should I be reading? If you wanted to bake a cake, you can research the recipe for baking a cake. I'm pretty sure you can research some books. I'm not here to teach you, although you might be a white ally, I'm not here to teach you about racism and how it affects me. Go pick up what I'm no longer talking to white people about race. How about that? What I also want to see is the time that we are being silent needs to be no more. No more. You know how they used to call us and stereotype us as loud and aggressive? Well, yeah, let's be loud and aggressive. How about that? Because that seems to be the only way we can get our points across. I'm very loud, and that's why they call me a troublemaker. I'm unapologetically loud at that too. And finally, encourage your local community, your local councils, your county councils, your local representatives to center community voices, the most marginalized of community voices, in policymaking. When I led the Young Futures Commission and the Fair Futures Commission in Islington and Hackney, I ensured that they were at the heart of everything we did. We only have 1 minute to go, so I'm going to end it there. Nathan, any final comments? Just mindful, there's only a couple of seconds.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, if we're going to build back better, where do you want to see us, in 2030? Like if we're thinking like long-term vision, where do you want to be in 2030, Jermain?
Because question to me? Or
yeah.
Well, we're out of time, so I don't know. Maybe we should continue this conversation on Twitter. Follow me at Jermain Chapman. And Nathan, what's your Twitter?
Nathan Ashely, LDN.
Nathan Ashely, LDN. Follow us. Let's continue the conversation online. But please continue to participate in what's happening with BYP. It's an amazing conference. Thank you so much to the team for having us. You've been amazing. I'm reading through all the comments. Love it. Again, my final comment is be bold, be brave, be black.